changing gears a little bit, and excuse me for starting off with a vignette which seems entirely incongruous to the rest of the conversation. I was reading an article by Matthew Crawford recently, an American philosopher who's uh, very interesting, got a great Substack called Arcadelia, and he had been on holiday in Croatia, and he is also a recent convert, I think, in the last few years. And his headline was "Christianity is Sexy," and the reason why he wrote it was he was there with his wife, but he noticed he was surrounded by lots of bikini-clad women, and what he was noticing, he wasn't being untoward toward his wife, was that they're not being hassled anywhere. They're not being obviously looked up and down or ogled. And then he got thinking, well, he's surrounded by effectively Catholics and Orthodox Christians, which have built that part of the world for, again, over 1,000 years. And the argument he's making is Christianity's sexy because it suppresses male desire. It recognizes women's dignity, equal dignity, through the Christian faith. And through many generations, it has allowed women to be able to express themselves and to go out scantily clad, and particularly in places like Croatia, where effectively they know they're surrounded by other people who have been from that cultural background, and they're safe to walk around. And you wrote within your book that Christianity kickstarted a sexual revolution that predated the 1960s, long before. And perhaps you can put a theological basis to what I was talking about, so we're not just stuck with bikini-clad women in Croatia.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it, that at the start of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus kind of talks about the problem of lust, and he just refuses to lay the blame for the problem of lust at the feet of women and their attire, and instead he tells men to figure out where they're, the male gaze is what Jesus wants to refocus rather than female attire, and that it's astonishing how revolutionary that is. We can all think of cultures in which the blame is laid, and we can all think of even Christian cultures in which the blame is laid largely at the feet of women, and the expectation is largely that women should control the way they dress rather than men should control the way they look. But Jesus was way ahead of the curve on being a radical egalitarian in that sense. And what the first century sexual revolution is all about is basically going to Matthew chapter 5, where the Sermon on the Mount is written, and then going on a few chapters to Matthew chapter 19. And Jesus kind of brings a vision for sex and sexuality that is radically egalitarian. So if you imagine that the kind of the natural state of male-female relations, and certainly the traditional state of male-female relations, is that women have always been expected to be chaste and monogamous, virgins on their wedding nights, and then completely faithful throughout marriage. Men, on the other hand, and you can think about this both in terms of evolutionary biology, but you can also think about this in terms of traditions around the world and down through history. Men have always been given much more of a free pass to sow their wild oats, and they have not been expected to be virgins, to the point where actually in Latin, to talk about a virgin is to talk about a woman, right? Grammatically, it is difficult to talk about a male virgin in Latin. And in an ancient understanding, of course, a man is not going to be a virgin. And if you're talking about a virgin, you're talking about a woman. And so women have always been expected to be very restricted in their sexual decisions and lifestyle, and men have been freer, if you like. And there's been a great difference. What Jesus does in Matthew chapter 19 is just say, sex belongs within marriage between a man and a woman for life. That's your lot. The doors are locked. No one gets out of this thing alive. Right? And the red-blooded men surrounding Jesus. It's even recorded in Matthew chapter 19. They say, if this is the case, it would be better if we never married. Now, Matthew does not record what the disciples' wives thought about that question later on that night. I imagine if Peter's wife said, "What do you mean it'd be better if you weren't married? What are you doing?" But red-blooded men considered the sexual revolution of Jesus to be incredibly inhibiting, but it was utterly equalizing. You were expected to be virginal on your wedding night, the way that women have always expected to be virgin on their wedding night, and you're expected to be faithful within marriage, the way women have always been expected to be faithful throughout marriage. And what this birthed was really the first sexual revolution, I think, and it was an utterly egalitarian sexual revolution. The 1960s sexual revolution was egalitarian in the opposite direction. So through technology like the pill and through social attitudes, basically women were said, oh, you can be now as liberated and as expressive sexually as men had always been allowed to do. And so the equalization happened in the opposite direction in the 1960s. And in a sense, our sensibilities about sex and sexuality are a mixture of the original sexual revolution that Jesus had, which I think is the more romantic revolution, but it's a mixture of that first century revolution and the 20th century kind of sexual revolution, and we're kind of figuring that out. But I would direct people to a couple of books to read on this. So one would be Kyle Harper's wonderful book From Shame to Sin. A classicist and ancient historian, he kind of looks at the way that the Christians utterly rewired everything we think about sex, actually, largely through those two bits of teaching. Jesus basically says in Matthew 19, sex is for marriage, and Matthew 5 just says, and outside of that context, don't even think about it. That's that. And Kyle Harper says, all of our erotic energy is to be cramped into one frail sacred union called marriage. That's the Christian vision. But then the other book I'd invite people to have a look at is Joseph Henrich. He's an evolutionary biologist at Harvard. He's written a book called The Weirdest People in the World. Where does the peculiarity and the prosperity of the West come from? He says it's from the marriage and family program that the early church brought. And one of the things it does is, because it's radically egalitarian, it means that you won't have involuntary celibates, or you'll diminish the number of incels, involuntary celibates out there, because it's radically equalizing the playing field. You don't just get Genghis Khan, who gets all the women, one man for one woman, which is, it socializes sex and marriage out there in the culture. But therefore, men are tied to their women and to their children through the bond of marriage. And Joseph Henrich, he's not a romantic, but he just calls this the testosterone suppression system. And he says the early church reached down and grabbed men by the testicles. Which, not the most romantic way of putting it, but from an evolutionary biology point of view, that is kind of what happened. And I think that first century sexual revolution has been for the prosperity of our civilization. And so I would, neither Kyle Harper nor Joseph Henrich claim to be Christians, but I would just point you to, if you're looking for the wisdom of why Christians are so weird about sex, I would point people to those books.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I've certainly had these conversations with people before where they believe that the chastity within Christianity has been all about keeping women down, and as you've just outlined, no, the same standard applied to everyone. What I couldn't help but think toward the end there with the grabbing by the testicles remark is there are some young red-blooded males out there warming up to moving towards Christianity until they heard that line. And I suppose the only way we can win them back on this front is the other way of looking at this is that women benefit from this so much, insofar as we also benefit from it, that we get to know someone so intimately, that I get to treat them as though they are cosmically significant and not some kind of sexual chattel that we can just pick up and put down. And within that, it civilizes us. It gives us a depth of human experience that we could have never experienced otherwise if we just went round like Genghis Khan, treating everyone uh, as he did and leaving them on the wayside and causing much harm and distress along the way. And that's the I suppose that gets all the way back to the Christian story of everyone's endowed with the same dignity, and that's why it's worrying with the recession of Christianity, because without Imago Dei, without we're created in the image of God, every single one of us being equal, that it opens the door for us to treat, whether sexually or otherwise, people as less than human. And we've got plenty of examples from history as to why that is not good, both for them, for us, for civilization,